prosperity isn't an accident. It's not luck, and it certainly isn't the result of government planning. After decades of studying economic systems around the world, analyzing monetary data across centuries, and observing the rise and fall of nations, I've identified a proven formula that consistently produces economic prosperity. This formula isn't theoretical, it's been tested by history itself, from Hong Kong's miraculous transformation to America's own economic ascendancy. Most politicians promise prosperity through spending programs, subsidies, and regulations. They're looking in the wrong direction. The evidence shows something entirely different. Nations prosper when government gets out of the way and allows the four fundamental pillars of economic freedom to operate. These pillars have lifted more people out of poverty than any government program ever conceived. They've created more wealth, more innovation, and more opportunity than any central planning committee could dream of. Today, I'll reveal this time-tested formula that transforms struggling economies into engines of prosperity. You'll see why countries that embrace these principles consistently outperform those that don't, and why ignoring them leads to stagnation and decline. The data doesn't lie, and neither do the results that have transformed millions of lives across the globe. Chapter 1, the first pillar, sound money and monetary stability. The foundation of any prosperous economy is sound money, currency that maintains its value and allows people to plan for the future. Throughout my research into monetary history, one pattern emerges consistently: nations with stable currencies prosper, while those with debased money suffer economic chaos. Consider the evidence from my extensive analysis of American monetary history. When we maintained the gold standard from 1879 to 1914, the United States experienced unprecedented economic growth. Prices were stable, investment flowed freely, and entrepreneurs could make long-term decisions with confidence. Compare this to the inflationary periods following our departure from sound monetary principles, the stagflation of the 1970s, where both unemployment and inflation soared simultaneously, something Keynesian theory said was impossible. The mechanism is straightforward. Sound money serves as a reliable store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. When people trust their currency, they save, invest, and build for the future. When they don't trust it, they hoard real assets. Speculation replaces productive investment, and economic calculation becomes impossible. Look at countries that have achieved monetary stability after periods of chaos. Chile's economic miracle began when they adopted sound monetary policies in the 1970s. Their GDP per capita increased dramatically, poverty fell, and foreign investment poured in. The same pattern repeated in Israel when they conquered hyperinflation through monetary discipline. The Federal Reserve's role should be simple: maintain price stability. Not full employment, not economic growth, not social justice. These are beyond monetary policy's proper scope. When central banks try to fine-tune the economy through activist monetary policy, they create the boom-bust cycles that devastate working families. The data from decades of Fed intervention shows this clearly. Every attempt to stimulate growth through monetary expansion ultimately leads to inflation, followed by the painful recession needed to restore balance. Sound money isn't just about economics, it's about justice. Inflation is a hidden tax that falls heaviest on those least able to protect themselves: workers on fixed incomes, retirees, and savers. The wealthy can hedge against inflation through real assets, but the middle class sees their purchasing power erode silently. This is why the first pillar of prosperity must be monetary stability achieved through limiting government's power to debase the currency. Chapter 2, the second pillar, free and competitive markets. The second pillar of prosperity is genuinely free markets where competition, not government favor, determines winners and losers. My decades of research consistently show that competitive markets produce better outcomes for consumers than any alternative system ever devised. The beauty of free markets lies in their self-correcting nature. When businesses serve customers well, they profit and expand. When they don't, competitors drive them out. No bureaucrat needs to decide which companies deserve to succeed. Customers make that determination daily through their purchasing decisions. This process, which I've observed in countless industries, drives continuous improvement in quality while reducing costs. But free markets require genuine freedom, not the crony capitalism that masquerades as free enterprise. When government picks winners through subsidies, bailouts, or protective regulations, it corrupts the competitive process. Large corporations learn to compete in Washington rather than in the marketplace, seeking regulatory moats instead of serving customers better. The evidence from international comparisons is overwhelming. The Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom consistently shows that countries with freer markets enjoy higher living standards, faster growth, and greater social mobility. Singapore, Switzerland, and Hong Kong built prosperity through competitive markets, while heavily regulated economies stagnate. True competition also requires the freedom to fail. Bankruptcy isn't a flaw in the market system, it's a feature. It reallocates resources from less efficient to more efficient uses, disciplines management, and maintains the incentive structure that drives innovation. When government prevents failure through bailouts, it corrupts the entire system and creates moral hazard that encourages reckless behavior. Free markets also democratize economic opportunity. You don't need political connections or inherited wealth to succeed in a competitive market. You need to serve customers better than your competitors. Some of America's greatest entrepreneurs started with nothing but good ideas and determination, building enterprises that created millions of jobs and immense value for society. Chapter 3, the third pillar, limited government and rule of law. The third pillar supporting economic prosperity is limited government operating under the rule of law. Government has essential functions: protecting property rights, enforcing contracts, and maintaining order, but when it exceeds these bounds, it becomes a drag on economic growth and human freedom. The relationship between government size and economic performance is clear from decades of comparative data. Countries with smaller government sectors relative to their economies consistently outperform those with larger ones. This isn't ideology, it's empirical reality confirmed by cross-country studies spanning multiple decades. Government spending crowds out private investment through several mechanisms. First, it diverts resources from productive private use to less efficient government use. Private actors, disciplined by profit and loss, allocate resources more efficiently than bureaucrats spending other people's money. Second, financing government spending through taxes reduces incentives to work, save, and invest. Third, financing through borrowing drives up interest rates, making private investment more expensive. But the damage goes beyond simple resource allocation. As government grows, it creates constituencies dependent on its continued expansion. Each new program creates beneficiaries who lobby for its preservation and growth, while the costs are dispersed among taxpayers who individually bear small amounts but collectively pay enormous sums. This dynamic, which I've observed throughout my career studying public choice economics, creates a ratchet effect where government tends to grow inexorably. The rule of law is equally crucial. Prosperity requires predictable, impartial enforcement of property rights and contracts. When laws change arbitrarily, when courts are corrupt, or when government officials can expropriate private property at will, investment dries up and economic development stalls. Entrepreneurs need confidence that their efforts will be protected, not confiscated. Compare the economic performance of countries with strong rule of law, like Switzerland, Singapore, and New Zealand, with those where law is arbitrary and property rights are insecure. The correlation is unmistakable. Foreign investment flows to countries where contracts are enforced and property is secure, while avoiding those where legal systems are unpredictable or corrupt. Limited government doesn't mean ineffective government. A government that focuses on its core functions, maintaining order, protecting rights, and providing essential public goods, can perform these tasks better than one that spreads itself thin across countless activities. When government tries to do everything, it typically does nothing well. The American experience demonstrates this principle clearly. Our periods of greatest prosperity coincided with eras of relatively limited government, while economic stagnation has accompanied the growth of the welfare regulatory state. Chapter 4, the fourth pillar, individual economic freedom and choice. The fourth and final pillar of prosperity is individual economic freedom, the right of people to choose how to use their time, talents, and resources. This freedom encompasses occupational choice, freedom to start businesses, freedom to trade across borders, and freedom from excessive regulation that constrains productive activity. Economic freedom and prosperity are inextricably linked because freedom allows people to pursue their comparative advantages. When individuals can choose their occupations based on their skills and preferences, rather than government assignment or artificial barriers, the entire economy becomes more productive. This is basic economics, but its implications are profound. Consider the transformative power of occupational freedom. In planned economies, bureaucrats assign people to jobs regardless of their talents or preferences. The result is chronic inefficiency and widespread misery. In contrast, free societies allow people to find their most productive roles through voluntary exchange, creating wealth for themselves and society. The same principle applies to entrepreneurship. Some of history's greatest innovations came from individuals who saw opportunities that established businesses missed. But entrepreneurship requires freedom, freedom to start new ventures, freedom from excessive regulation, and freedom to compete with established interests. When government protects existing businesses from competition or imposes overwhelming regulatory burdens on startups, it stifles the innovation that drives prosperity. International trade exemplifies economic freedom's wealth-creating power. When people can trade freely across borders, they can specialize in producing what they do best and trading for what others produce better. This principle, which David Ricardo demonstrated 2 centuries ago, remains as valid today as ever. Countries that embrace free trade consistently outperform those that maintain protectionist barriers. The empirical evidence overwhelmingly supports the connection between economic freedom and prosperity. The Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World Index, covering over 160 countries across multiple decades, shows that freer countries enjoy higher per capita incomes, faster growth rates, longer life expectancy, and greater social mobility. The relationship is so consistent it amounts to an economic law. But economic freedom requires more than absence of government interference. It requires positive protection of individual rights. People need secure property rights, enforceable contracts, and legal protections against fraud and coercion. This is why the rule of law, discussed in the previous pillar, is so crucial to maintaining economic freedom. The beauty of economic freedom is that it aligns individual self-interest with social benefit. When people are free to pursue their own economic interests through voluntary exchange, they automatically serve others' interests as well. This invisible hand mechanism, first described by Adam Smith, remains the most powerful force for human betterment ever discovered. Chapter 5, How These Pillars Work Together, the Synergy of Freedom. The 4 pillars of prosperity don't operate in isolation. They reinforce each other in a synergistic system that creates sustained economic growth and human flourishing. Understanding these interactions is crucial because partial reforms often fail while comprehensive approaches succeed dramatically. Sound money facilitates free markets by providing a reliable medium of exchange and store of value. When currency is stable, entrepreneurs can make long-term investments, Contracts have meaning, and price signals accurately reflect supply and demand. Conversely, monetary chaos makes economic calculation impossible and turns markets into casinos where speculation replaces productive investment. Limited government protects both sound money and free markets from political manipulation. When government power is constrained, politicians can't inflate the currency to fund spending programs or use regulations to benefit politically favored groups. This protection allows market forces to operate efficiently and maintains the integrity of the monetary system. Individual economic freedom both requires and strengthens the other pillars. People need sound money to plan for the future, competitive markets to offer them choices, and limited government to protect their rights. In return, economically free individuals create the wealth that makes sound fiscal policy possible and the innovation that drives market dynamism. The interconnections go deeper. Free markets generate the information needed for sound monetary policy through price signals that reflect real economic conditions. Limited government ensures that this information isn't distorted by political interference. Economic freedom allows people to respond quickly to changing conditions, making the entire system more adaptable and resilient. Historical examples illustrate these synergies powerfully. Hong Kong's economic miracle wasn't built on any single policy but on implementing all four pillars simultaneously. The colony maintained currency stability through a currency board, embraced free trade and competition, kept government small and focused, and protected individual economic rights. The result was the fastest sustained economic growth in human history. Conversely, countries that implement only partial reforms often struggle. Russia's transition from communism initially focused on privatization without establishing rule of law or monetary stability. The result was oligarchy and economic chaos rather than prosperity. Only when countries implement comprehensive reforms do they achieve sustained success. The synergy also explains why prosperity is fragile. Undermining any single pillar weakens the entire structure. Monetary irresponsibility corrupts market signals, excessive government crowds out private initiative, and restrictions on economic freedom reduce the system's dynamism. This is why vigilance is essential. Prosperity requires constant attention to maintaining all four pillars. Modern challenges like global competition and technological change make these synergies even more important. Countries that maintain all four pillars can adapt quickly to changing conditions, while those with compromised systems fall behind. The choice for every nation is clear: embrace the proven formula for prosperity or accept relative decline. Chapter 6: Historical Evidence: Nations that applied the formula. The prosperity formula isn't theoretical speculation, it's been tested repeatedly throughout history, with remarkably consistent results. Let me share the empirical evidence from nations that embraced these principles and transformed their economies from poverty to prosperity within a generation. Start with the most dramatic example, South Korea in the 1960s. Following the devastation of war, South Korea was poorer than most African nations, with per capita income below $100. The government implemented comprehensive reforms embracing all four pillars. They stabilized the currency, opened markets to competition, limited government's economic role, and protected individual economic rights. The results were spectacular. GDP per capita increased over 100-fold in 4 decades, transforming an agricultural society into an industrial powerhouse. Chile provides another compelling case study. After decades of economic stagnation under statist policies, Chile embraced free market reforms in the 1970s and 1980s. They privatized state enterprises, deregulated markets, reformed the monetary system, and protected property rights. Chilean GDP per capita tripled between 1975 and 2000, while poverty rates plummeted from over 40% to under 20%. Chile became Latin America's most prosperous nation by consistently applying the prosperity formula. The transformation of Eastern Europe after 1989 offers a natural experiment in economic systems. Countries that rapidly implemented comprehensive reforms, like Estonia, Poland, and the Czech Republic, experienced faster growth and higher living standards than those that pursued gradual or partial reforms. Estonia, which embraced radical free market policies including a flat tax and currency board, became one of Europe's fastest-growing economies. Even within the United States, we can observe the formula's power at the state level. States with lower taxes, less regulation, sounder fiscal policies, and greater economic freedom consistently outperform those with higher government intervention. Texas, Florida, and Tennessee have attracted businesses and population from high-tax, high-regulation states like California and New York. The migration patterns speak volumes about where people believe they can prosper. The contrast with planned economies is stark. The Soviet Union, despite vast natural resources and educated population, couldn't match the prosperity of much smaller free market economies. East Germany, with the same culture and work ethic as West Germany, fell far behind economically under central planning. Cuba remains impoverished while practicing socialism, despite advantages like educated population and favorable location. Perhaps most tellingly, countries that abandoned the prosperity formula experienced economic decline. Argentina, once among the world's wealthiest nations, fell into relative poverty as it embraced status policies and abandoned sound economic principles. Venezuela, blessed with enormous oil wealth, destroyed its economy through price controls, currency manipulation, and attacks on private property. The pattern is so consistent it amounts to an economic law. Nations that embrace sound money, free markets, limited government, and individual economic freedom prosper, while those that reject these principles stagnate or decline. This isn't ideological assertion, it's empirical reality confirmed by decades of comparative economic data. Chapter 7, Implementing the Formula, a Practical Roadmap for America. America faces a choice. We can continue down the path of expanding government, monetary manipulation, and increasing regulation, or we can return to the principles that made us the world's most prosperous nation. The evidence shows clearly which path leads to continued prosperity and which leads to decline. Restoring sound money requires fundamental Federal Reserve reform. The Fed should focus exclusively on price stability, abandoning attempts to fine-tune employment or economic growth through monetary policy. A constitutional amendment limiting the Fed's mandate to maintaining stable purchasing power would prevent future monetary adventures that create boom-bust cycles. Better yet, we should seriously consider returning to a gold standard or similar mechanism that automatically constrains monetary expansion. Revitalizing free markets means eliminating the regulatory barriers that protect established businesses from competition. We need comprehensive deregulation across industries, from telecommunications to transportation to energy. Occupational licensing laws that serve no public safety purpose but merely restrict competition should be eliminated. Antitrust enforcement should focus on protecting competition, not competitors, allowing market forces to determine business success. Limiting government requires more than rhetoric. It demands structural reforms that make growth in government spending difficult. Constitutional spending limits, balanced budget requirements, and sunset clauses for all government programs would institutionalize fiscal discipline. We should eliminate entire government departments that exceed constitutional authority, privatize activities that private markets can perform better, and devolve power back to states and localities. Expanding individual economic freedom means removing barriers that prevent people from pursuing their chosen careers and lifestyles. This includes eliminating minimum wage laws that price low-skilled workers out of jobs, abolishing regulations that favor large corporations over small businesses, and establishing nationwide school choice so parents can select their children's education regardless of their zip code or income level. Tax reform should simplify the system while reducing rates across the board. A flat tax with a generous personal exemption would eliminate the complexity that benefits only tax lawyers and accountants while reducing the deadweight losses that current progressive taxation imposes on economic growth. Lower tax rates would encourage work, saving, and investment while reducing incentives for tax avoidance. Trade policy should embrace the principle of unilateral free trade. We should eliminate tariffs and trade barriers regardless of what other countries do, because these restrictions primarily harm American consumers and businesses. Free trade agreements are better than protectionism, but unilateral free trade is superior to both because it doesn't require lengthy negotiations or diplomatic compromises. The transition requires political courage because entrenched interests will resist reforms that threaten their privileged positions. But the American people understand that our current path is unsustainable. They see other countries applying the prosperity formula and pulling ahead of us economically. They recognize that their children face diminished opportunities unless we change course. History shows that comprehensive reform works better than gradual change because it prevents opponents from mobilizing resistance and creates positive feedback loops that build political support for continued reforms. The sooner we begin, the more prosperous America's future will be. Conclusion. The formula for economic prosperity isn't mysterious or complex. It's been proven repeatedly throughout history by nations that transformed themselves from poverty to abundance. Sound money, free markets, limited government, and individual economic freedom work together to create the conditions where human creativity and entrepreneurship can flourish. The choice before America is clear. We can continue expanding government, manipulating currency, restricting markets, and limiting individual freedom, the path that leads inevitably to European-style stagnation. Or we can recommit to the principles that built American prosperity, trusting people rather than planners, markets rather than bureaucrats, freedom rather than control. The evidence from around the world demonstrates conclusively that countries embracing the prosperity formula outperform those that don't. This isn't theory, it's observable reality confirmed by decades of comparative data. Nations that implement these four pillars consistently see rising living standards, expanding opportunity, and growing prosperity for all their citizens. The time for half measures and incremental reforms has passed. America needs comprehensive change that addresses all four pillars simultaneously, creating the synergies that drive sustained prosperity. The longer we delay, the more ground we lose to countries that understand and apply these timeless principles. Our prosperity isn't guaranteed, it requires constant vigilance and willingness to choose freedom over security, markets over planning, and individual responsibility over government dependency. The formula works, but only if we have the courage to implement it fully and consistently.